Emily and her partner David couldn't have children of their own, so they decided to adopt. One girl at the orphanage immediately caught their attention: Sophie. What made her stand out wasn't just her appearance, but a unique birthmark on her hand, identical to Emily's. It felt like fate. But when Emily later took a DNA test, what she discovered left her utterly shocked. Sitting anxiously in the doctor's office, Emily was consumed with dread. The doctor had insisted on giving her the results in person, a sign that something was seriously wrong. As soon as he walked into the room, Emily knew. The look on his face said it all. She begged him to tell her the truth, and he did. The revelation hit her like a tidal wave. The DNA results showed something she could never have imagined. How was this possible? What was the truth about Sophie's real identity? But before we dive into the story, make sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our exciting stories. It all started when Emily and David explored adoption. While David was eager, Emily hesitated. She feared that adopting a child would make her feel more like a babysitter than a real mother. The idea of not sharing a biological connection troubled her. However, David convinced her to visit an orphanage with him, and that's when everything changed. At first, Emily felt detached from the idea of adopting any of the children they saw. But then she saw Sophie, a quiet, sad-looking girl who had been at the orphanage for over 2 years. Something about the little girl drew Emily in, and then she noticed the birthmark. It was exactly like her own, in the same spot on her hand. It couldn't be a coincidence. They had to adopt Sophie. When Emily and David brought Sophie home, their family threw a big party. Everyone was thrilled except for Emily. She started to notice that Sophie bonded with David and his family more than with her. Sophie seemed distant despite Emily's efforts to connect. Soon, Emily began to feel like an outsider in her own home. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As time passed, Emily grew suspicious. Could Sophie be more connected to David than she thought? Could she actually be his biological child from a secret past? Emily couldn't let go of her suspicions. Sophie adored David, and their bond seemed almost too strong, especially considering how little time they spent together during the week. Sophie barely acknowledged Emily, preferring David and his family. The growing distance between mother and daughter gnawed at Emily's heart, making her question everything. It wasn't just the bond between Sophie and David that raised red flags. Sophie was also much closer to David's parents and sister than to Emily's side of the family. No matter what Emily did, Sophie kept her distance, leaving Emily feeling more like an outsider. The doubts that crept into her mind became impossible to ignore. She started to wonder, was Sophie actually David's biological child? Emily couldn't believe she was even thinking this. She trusted David, but the pieces were starting to fit together in a way she couldn't ignore. Was it possible that David had fathered Sophie with another woman? Emily felt torn. She didn't want to accuse David of something so terrible, but she had to know the truth. Determined to get answers, Emily devised a plan. She decided to collect DNA samples from both David and Sophie without their knowledge. It felt wrong, but Emily was desperate. She had to know the truth, even if it meant going behind David's back. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Emily quietly swabbed David's cheek while he slept, then sneaked into Sophie's room to do the same. She felt guilty, but there was no turning back now. A week later, the DNA results were ready. Emily received a call from the doctor's office asking her to come in. Her heart raced as she sat in the waiting room, dreading what the doctor was about to tell her. When the doctor finally handed her the results, Emily's world shattered. The truth was far worse than she had ever imagined. Emily stared at the DNA results in disbelief. She had feared David might be Sophie's biological father, But the truth was something entirely different. Sophie wasn't David's daughter, she was his niece. The doctor explained everything. Sophie was actually the biological child of David's sister, who had struggled with addiction for years. In her darkest days, she had given Sophie up for adoption without telling anyone. When she finally confessed to the family, David's parents were determined to keep Sophie in their lives. They came up with the plan to have Emily and David adopt Sophie without telling Emily the truth. Emily felt betrayed by the people closest to her. Not only had David kept this secret from her, but his entire family had been involved in the lie. They had all conspired to trick her into adopting Sophie, hoping that the shared birthmark would make Emily feel an immediate connection and overlook any doubts. And it had worked, at least for a while. Emily was furious. She left the doctor's office with the DNA results in hand, determined to confront David. When she got home, she found him sitting at the kitchen table, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. "Tell me the truth about Sophie, she demanded, her voice all trembling with anger. David tried to brush it off, repeating the same excuse that Sophie just needed more time to bond with Emily. But Emily wasn't having it. "Stop lying to me. I know everything," she shouted, throwing the folder with the DNA results onto the table. David's face went pale. He knew he had been caught. Finally, David admitted the truth. Sophie was his niece, not his daughter, but the deception ran deep. His parents had pressured him into the adoption plan, believing it was the only way to keep Sophie in the family. David had wanted to tell Emily, but once the adoption was in motion, he felt trapped. Now it was all unraveling. Emily was devastated. The man she trusted had been lying to her all along, and now she didn't know if their marriage could survive this betrayal. Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man she had shared her life with, trusted with her deepest thoughts, had conspired with his family to deceive her in such a monumental way. She had never imagined their relationship would be tainted by such a betrayal. David sat quietly, clearly remorseful, but Emily's emotions were spiraling. Anger, sadness, and confusion all hit her at once. How could David justify keeping such a massive secret? David tried to explain, his voice low and filled with regret. He told her how his parents had convinced him that this was the only way to keep Sophie close. They had used the emotional connection of the birthmark to manipulate Emily into believing this was fate. David admitted that he had gone along with it, despite his initial hesitations, because he didn't know how to refuse his parents. He had been desperate to help his sister, who was now clean and trying to rebuild her life and to keep Sophie in the family. But none of this made Emily feel any better. She felt like her entire life with David had been built on lies. How could she trust him again after this? Even though he wasn't Sophie's biological father, the fact that he had orchestrated this entire adoption without telling her the truth felt like the ultimate betrayal. "I need time," Emily finally said, her voice trembling. She couldn't bear to look at David anymore. She picked up the DNA results and left the room, her heart heavy with the realization that her life had been changed forever. In the days that followed, Emily felt lost. She avoided David and spent a lot of time by herself, trying to process everything. Sophie, still unaware of the turmoil, continued to bond with David and his family. Emily, on the other hand, struggled to even look at the little girl without being reminded of the betrayal. Finally, after some time, Emily made a decision. She couldn't keep living in the dark, unsure of what to do next. She needed to confront David's parents and his sister. They had all played a part in this, and Emily wanted answers. When Emily confronted them, the guilt was obvious. David's parents admitted that they had been selfish in their desire to keep Sophie in their lives, and they apologized profusely. David's sister, who had been recovering from her addiction, also begged for forgiveness. She explained that giving up Sophie had been the hardest decision of her life. And when her parents came up with the idea of adoption, she felt it was her only chance to stay connected to her daughter. But despite their apologies, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they had all betrayed her. The trust between them was broken, and she didn't know if it could ever be repaired. In the end, Sophie returned to live with her biological mother, David's sister. Emily and David sought help from a marriage counselor, trying to salvage what was left of their relationship. Although it wasn't easy, they slowly began to rebuild trust. But they made the difficult decision not to have any more children. For now, they focused on healing and moving forward, just the two of them. Emily knew that her life would never be the same, but she hoped that, in time, the pain of this betrayal would fade and she and David could find happiness again.